The morning sun rose gently over the Turner Ranch, painting the dry fields in shades of gold and rust. A layer of dew clung to the tall grass, glimmering like tiny shards of glass as the wind swept through the valley. Eli Turner stood before his new gate, solid iron, freshly painted in a deep rich red that caught the light like embers. He took a slow step back, wiping a line of sweat from his brow with his gloved hand. The paint still smelled faintly sharp in the air, a scent of fresh change. For Eli, this wasn't just a gate, it was a mark of freedom. After years of dealing with pushy HOA letters, nosy inspectors, and friendly reminders, he wanted something that reminded him this land, all 40 acres of it, was his. He leaned against the fence post and admired how the crimson color contrasted with the faded wood of the corral. The land stretched endlessly behind him, the barn, the small pond, the long gravel road winding toward the highway. Out here, silence had always been sacred. But the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke that peace. Eli squinted down the road as a spotless white SUV rolled into view, gleaming under the morning light like a polished badge of authority. He didn't have to see the driver to know who it was. Margaret Holt, HOA president, self-declared guardian of community harmony. Margaret stepped out, clutching a clipboard as if it were a weapon. She was dressed sharply, her pastel suit perfectly pressed, her short silver hair immovable against the wind. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she looked up at the gate. "Mr. Turner," she called out, voice crisp as glass. "This color isn't within the approved palette for perimeter structures. You'll need to repaint it by the end of the week." Eli tilted his hat back and gave her a long, patient look. "Morning to you too, Margaret. You drove quite a way just to tell me that." His voice was calm, steady, the kind of tone that made people listen even when he wasn't trying to sound commanding. He gestured casually toward the gate. "This here's on my side of the boundary line. HOA rules stop 200 feet east, right by that old oak tree. Been that way since '89. Margaret's nostrils flared. "That oak tree is a marker, not a boundary. The aesthetic of this community affects all residents, whether they're just inside or adjacent. That color is disruptive, unsightly, and frankly," she glanced at the red metal as if it offended her existence, "uncivilized." Eli didn't move. He just looked at her, his jaw tightening slightly. "You're welcome to your opinion," he said quietly. "But this is my property. My paint. My gate." He gave the metal a firm pat, the sound echoing like punctuation. "I ain't changing it." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Only the soft chirp of a distant meadowlark broke the stillness. Margaret's face twitched, not with anger yet, but with disbelief. She wasn't used to defiance. Most people around here caved the moment she mentioned fines or violations. Her authority had never been questioned, not in 10 years. She closed her clipboard sharply and took a single step closer, lowering her voice. "Mr. Turner, I'll be filing a notice with the board this afternoon. You'll be receiving formal correspondence shortly." Eli turned back toward his barn. "You do that, Margaret," he said over his shoulder. "But this gate's staying red." The sound of the SUV door slamming echoed down the empty road as she climbed back in, her tires kicking up dust behind her. Eli watched the trail fade into the horizon, then turned back to his gate. The sun had climbed higher now, bathing it in warm light that seemed to burn brighter against the fields. He smiled faintly. He'd faced droughts, debts, and hard winters. He could handle an HOA president with too much free time. Yet as the day wore on, that uneasy feeling stayed with him, not fear, but awareness. Margaret Holt wasn't the kind to let go of a loss. And as Eli stood there, watching the light shift from gold to amber, the red of his gate seemed to grow darker, almost defiant against the calm sky. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out. It sounded like a warning. The first letter came 3 days later, tucked neatly between the electric bill and a seed catalog in Eli's rusted mailbox. The HOA emblem at the top, 2 neat oak leaves encircling a house, was embossed in gold, as if to remind him of authority even before he opened it. Inside, the words were polite but sharp, dressed in bureaucratic courtesy. This correspondence serves as formal notification of non-compliance with community aesthetic guidelines. It demanded that the unauthorized red structure be repainted to approved neutral tones within 10 days. Eli read it twice, then folded it calmly and placed it on the kitchen counter beneath a coffee mug. He didn't respond. The land outside the window stretched wide and unbothered. The cattle moved slowly under the sun, the red gate standing tall at the fence line like a stubborn sentinel. By the end of the week, there were 3 more letters. The tone shifted with each one, less formality, more threat. Fines would begin accruing. Legal action would be considered. HOA bylaws were cited, paragraphs copied from rulebooks Eli never agreed to. He sat at his old oak table one night with the letters spread before him, their official fonts and seals glowing under the dim light of the kitchen bulb. His friend and neighbor, Jake, dropped by with a 6-pack and a curious grin. "You really got her fired up, huh?" Jake chuckled, nodding at the pile. "Margaret's been pacing around the post office like she's fixin' to declare war." Eli smirked faintly. "Let her pace," he said. "The line's clear. I checked the survey myself." But his eyes lingered on the papers. Each new letter came faster, more aggressive, like footsteps closing in. Within 2 weeks, strangers began showing up. Men in reflective vests with clipboards wandered near his fence, pretending to take notes on road maintenance but peering a little too long toward his gate. Eli installed 2 motion-activated cameras, one by the barn, one on the main post of the red gate. The footage he reviewed that night made his jaw tighten. A woman from the HOA board, phone in hand, stepping over the line, snapping pictures, muttering something to herself. He saved the clip. The next morning, another envelope arrived, this one marked asterisk, final notice. Asterisk Margaret's signature was at the bottom, in her neat cursive. Failure to comply, it read, asterisk, will result in formal proceedings and potential seizure of property for delinquent fines. Asterisk. That night, the wind howled across the fields, rattling the window frames as Eli sat alone, staring at the gate in the distance through the glass. The red metal glowed faintly under the moonlight, a reminder of defiance, yes, but also of how far Margaret was willing to go. He wasn't just dealing with a nosy neighbor anymore. She was making it personal. Every notice she sent, every call she made to the county office, every whisper in town was designed to wear him down. Yet, instead of retreating, it only made him more resolute. He drafted his own letters in response, carefully worded, quoting boundary laws and property rights. He even attached printed copies of the county map, the one showing the HOA's official perimeter ending well before his ranch. Each envelope he mailed back was a silent message, "I'm not backing down." By the end of the month, his mailbox was overflowing, and the story had started spreading across the town. Some laughed at it, a battle over paint, but others saw something deeper. To the locals, Eli wasn't just fighting over a color. He was fighting for principle, for the right to live without someone breathing down his neck. Margaret, on the other hand, had made it a crusade. She called emergency HOA meetings, pressured neighbors to file complaints, and warned others not to encourage Turner's rebellion. The air in the community grew thick with whispers and tension. But out on the Turner Ranch, under the wide expanse of stars, the red gate stood unchanged. It had become more than a piece of metal, it was a flag. And as Eli leaned against the fence one quiet evening, listening to the cicadas hum in the tall grass, he knew the fight was far from over. What he didn't know yet was just how far Margaret was willing to take it, and how soon their paths would collide face to face again. The sun beat down mercilessly that afternoon, the kind of heat that blurred the edges of the horizon and turned the air above the gravel road into rippling glass. Eli was out in the lower pasture, the rumble of his tractor the only sound breaking the stillness. He'd been hauling hay bale since morning, his shirt darkened with sweat, his mind set on keeping busy. The past few weeks had been a blur of letters, legal talk, and whispers from town, each one more absurd than the last. But work, he found, had a way of grounding him. The weight of the land beneath his boots reminded him that some things were still solid, still his. The red gate stood at the edge of the property, catching the afternoon light like a brand, its color deepened by dust and sun. From the corner of his eye, he saw a shimmer of silver cresting the hill, the unmistakable glint of Margaret Holt's SUV. His stomach tightened, not with fear, but with that quiet weariness that comes from knowing exactly what kind of trouble's rolling your way. She didn't stop at the usual distance this time. Instead, she drove straight down the dirt path, the tires grinding through loose gravel until she skidded to a stop squarely in front of his tractor. The engine sputtered under him as he eased off the throttle, dust rising around both of them like smoke after a shot fired. Margaret stepped out fast, clutching another folder to her chest. The sun caught the edge of her pearl earrings, but her face was flushed red with anger. "This has gone far enough, Mr. Turner," she called out, voice sharp enough to slice through the heat. "You are in direct violation of Community Code Section 47.3. I've brought the paperwork too." Eli cut the engine completely, and the sudden silence was deafening. He climbed down slowly, boots thudding on dry earth. "Margaret," he said evenly, pulling off his gloves. "You're trespassing again. You're on my land." "This is community property access," she snapped, waving the folder like a badge. "And I will not tolerate another act of defiance. You think you're above the rules because you live past that ridiculous fence? This entire neighborhood looks at you as an example of disorder, and I—" "Enough." The word came quiet, but final. Eli's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. He took a slow step toward her, squinting against the glare. "You came onto my land without permission. Again. You sent threats, lies, and people to take pictures of my property. I've stayed calm through all of it. But you don't get to stand in front of my tractor and bark orders like you own the dirt under my feet." Margaret stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. "You think you can intimidate me with your machinery?" she hissed. "You wouldn't dare move that thing while I'm standing here." Her heels dug into the ground, her chin lifted in defiance. Behind her, the sound of murmurs rose. Neighbors had gathered along the road, drawn by the commotion. Some held up their phones, recording. Others just watched, the heat shimmering between them like a veil. Eli looked past her for a moment, scanning the faces. The quiet crowd was growing. He turned back to Margaret, his expression unreadable. "No, ma'am," he said calmly. "I wouldn't dare, but I will move forward, because that's what this machine does, and that's what I do." He stepped back up into the cab, hands steady on the controls. The tractor roared back to life, the deep mechanical growl echoing through the fields. Margaret's eyes widened. "Don't you," she started, stumbling a step backward as the massive front tires rolled forward inch by inch. Eli didn't look at her. He didn't have to. The motion was slow, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock counting down her pride. Dust billowed up, coating her shiny car, her pastel suit, her perfect hair. She coughed, waving the folder in the air, retreating as the tractor advanced another few feet. The crowd's murmurs turned into gasps and scattered laughter. Someone shouted, "Get out of the way, Margaret!" Another voice called, "It's his land!" The chaos grew, but Eli's eyes stayed fixed ahead. He guided the tractor down the dirt path, passing the red gate with the same steady rhythm as always. Margaret stood frozen beside her dust-covered car, her folder hanging limply by her side. Her authority, once absolute, had just been reduced to noise in the wind. When he finally cut the engine again, Eli turned back toward her. The dust had settled now, drifting in the golden light. His voice was low but clear when he spoke. "Next time you want to talk about rules," he said, "bring a map." Then he tipped his hat, climbed down, and walked back toward the barn, leaving her standing in the road as the crowd dispersed behind her. For a long time after he disappeared into the distance, Margaret didn't move. Her car, once spotless, was now coated in red dust, like the color she'd fought so hard to erase. The footage hit the internet before sunset. A neighbor's teenage son, filming from across the fence line, had caught every second of the confrontation, from Margaret's shrill demands to the slow, deliberate crawl of Eli's tractor inching forward. The sound of the engine, the dust rising, her panicked shuffle backward, it all became an instant online spectacle. By nightfall, the clip had racked up thousands of views. The title read, *HOA President Blocks Tractor, Instantly Regrets It. The thumbnail showed Margaret's furious face, mid-yell, half obscured by a cloud of dirt. But Eli didn't care about the internet. He hadn't even watched the video. That night, he sat on his porch with a cup of black coffee, the same way he always did after a long day. The fields were quiet again, the insects humming in the warm darkness. Out past the barn, the red gate glowed faintly under the floodlight, a stubborn landmark of the fight he never wanted but couldn't avoid. He could still see Margaret's face in his mind, the disbelief, the outrage, the way her voice cracked when she realized the crowd wasn't on her side anymore. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened her. He just kept moving. And somehow, that simple act had said more than any argument could. The next morning, things began to unravel quickly for Margaret. The HOA office line flooded with calls, some angry, some mocking, others demanding explanations. Reporters from the local news station showed up at the subdivision gates, cameras rolling, wanting a statement from the HOA president regarding the viral incident. She tried to keep her composure in the interviews, insisting that Eli had endangered her, that his behavior was reckless and hostile. But the video told a different story. People saw a woman drunk on power standing in front of a man minding his own business, and getting humbled by her own arrogance. Online forums lit up with jokes, memes, and comments cheering Eli on. The small community, once united by fear of HOA fines, started whispering about rebellion. Eli noticed it too. Trucks driving by the ranch would honk and wave. Someone even left a note at the end of his driveway that read, "keep the gate red." But with the attention came something heavier, the uneasy awareness that Margaret wasn't done yet. She still had her title, her signature on those letters, and a bitterness that ran deep. That evening, Eli saw headlights pull up again at the property line. It wasn't Margaret this time, but one of her board members, a timid man named Frank who'd never spoken more than a few words to him before. Frank stepped out slowly, hands raised in uneasy surrender. "She's losing it, Eli," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "The board's in chaos. She's talking about suing you personally, but we don't want any part of it. She's making us all look bad." He hesitated, then added, "Just be careful." The warning lingered long after Frank drove away. The night air felt heavier than usual, charged with something that sat between victory and unease. Eli walked out to the red gate and rested his hand on it, the metal cool under his fingers. He thought about everything that had led to this point, the letters, the trespasses, the shouting. It had started over something as simple as paint, but it wasn't about color anymore. It was about power, and the kind of people who thought they could take it from others just because they'd been handed a title. He glanced toward the horizon where the last of the daylight burned orange and pink across the sky. The tractor sat quietly nearby, dust still clinging to its tires, the same dust that had humbled a woman who believed she couldn't be touched. By the next morning, Margaret's resignation was public. The HOA board had convened an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her. Breach of conduct and public embarrassment were the official terms, but everyone knew it was more than that. Her name had become a joke around town, her face a meme. Eli heard about it from Jake, who drove up that afternoon grinning from ear to ear. "You did it, man," Jake said, laughing. "You didn't just win, you ended her whole empire." Eli smiled faintly but didn't gloat. He just looked out at the gate, the sunlight bouncing off the red paint, as a gust of warm wind carried the scent of hay and dust across the yard. He didn't move the tractor again that day. He didn't need to. It had already done what words and reason couldn't. It had moved forward, just like he would, no matter who tried to stand in his way. The land was quiet again, untouched by rules or politics. For the first time in weeks, it felt like peace. The red gate stood open now, its color blazing against the golden horizon, no longer a point of conflict but a symbol of what couldn't be controlled. And as Eli leaned against the fence post, hat low against the fading sun, he realized something simple but true. Sometimes, all it takes to win a fight is to keep moving forward. A week after Margaret Holt's resignation, the neighborhood was almost unrecognizable. The same streets that had once carried the sharp echo of her SUV tires now felt open, free, almost too quiet. The mailbox that had been a source of anxiety for months offered nothing now but grocery flyers and the occasional letter from a friend. Eli noticed the difference immediately, not just in the absence of envelopes stamped with the HOA emblem, but in the way people looked at him when he went into town. At the hardware store, at the feed shop, even at the diner on Main, folks nodded with a kind of unspoken respect. Some grinned, some clapped him on the shoulder, and more than once, someone would mutter, "You're the guy with the tractor." The video had spread further than anyone expected. News outlets picked it up, running short segments about a rancher standing his ground against an overreaching HOA. Talk shows debated property rights, small-town power, and the fine line between authority and abuse. Eli never gave interviews, never commented. He didn't see himself as a symbol, just a man who wanted to be left alone on his land. But still, letters began to arrive. Not from the HOA this time, but from strangers. Some were handwritten, from other homeowners telling their own stories about unreasonable boards and endless fines. Others came from lawyers, activists, even journalists. You gave people courage, one letter read in neat cursive. You reminded us that standing your ground still means something. For Eli, though, the real reward was simpler. Peace had returned to the ranch. The mornings were once again filled with the soft rhythm of work, the creak of the barn door, the hum of the tractor, the low calls of cattle across the field. When he looked toward the red gate now, it no longer felt like a challenge or a banner of defiance. It was just his gate, the same as it was meant to be from the beginning. The paint had faded slightly in the sun, turning from ember red to a more weathered rust. He liked it that way, honest, earned. Jake still came by most evenings, usually with a beer and a grin. "World's calm again," he'd say, settling into the porch chair beside him. "Guess we can all breathe now." But beneath that peace lingered a strange, quiet reflection. Margaret Holt had vanished from the neighborhood almost overnight. Her pristine SUV was gone from the driveway, the blinds drawn, the mailbox empty. Some said she'd moved to another state, others whispered about her losing her position at the realty office. Eli never asked. He figured whatever storm had followed her, she'd brought it on herself. Still, a part of him couldn't help but wonder if she'd learned anything from it, if she'd ever looked back at the moment she stood in front of that tractor and realized how ridiculous it was, how small the things we fight over can seem once the dust settles. One evening, just as the sky began to turn a deep violet, Eli climbed into his tractor again. Not to make a statement this time, but simply to work. The field was quiet except for the soft hum of the engine and the chirp of crickets. He drove slowly down the dirt path, passing through the red gate as he always did. The hinges creaked, the metal shimmered in the fading light, and for the first time in a long time, there was no tension in his chest. He paused for a moment halfway down the trail and looked back. The gate framed the landscape behind him, the barn, the house, the fields rolling out into the horizon. A perfect, simple picture of what peace looks like when it's finally earned. As the last of the sunlight caught the edges of the tractor's hood, Eli felt the same quiet satisfaction he had on the day he first painted that gate, a sense of completion, not victory. The world could turn itself inside out with rules and politics, with titles and fines and power struggles, but out here, none of that mattered. What mattered was the land, the work, and the small freedom of choosing one's own color for a gate. He drove on, disappearing into the dusk, the hum of the tractor fading into the distance. Behind him, the red gate stood still in the dying light, a monument to stubbornness, to dignity, and to the quiet kind of rebellion that only ever needed one direction, forward.